I want to start with something that Harjap talked about the tar sands and talking about where it fits into this so-called Security and Prosperity Initiative. It also fits into what I've been writing about for the past few years, what I'm trying to sort of map out of this disaster capitalism complex. Because I think what we're facing right now is that more and more of the global economy now does better the worse things get. Now, we know about the military-industrial complex. We know that weapons companies make money when there's war. But we are entering a new phase here, where we are in a new phase here. And we're seeing it in many ways. We're seeing it right now with the food crisis, where companies like Monsanto and Cargill are reporting staggering record profits in the midst of the crisis. We see it in the AIDS pandemic with the pharmaceutical companies making money hand over fist. We see it with the explosion of the Homeland Security complex, which is a now $200 billion global industry, more than Hollywood and the music industry combined. So it isn't just weapons. And these are the companies, how do we define a company that fits within this, what I'm calling disaster capitalism complex? These are the companies that do better the worse things get, i.e. they don't have the same interests as us. A terrorist attack happens, the NASDAQ goes up now, goes up. Why? Because all the Homeland Security stocks are soaring. There's a natural disaster, the stock market goes up now. Why? Because the insurance company stocks go up, because the mercenary company stocks go up, because the market is adapting. It is adapting to a new reality of constant crisis. So this sort of 1990s idea of no two countries with McDonald's have ever gone to war, trade creates stability, no. This is an adaptation to what we might think of as the Israeli model or the Colombia model, which is these are markets, actually some of the most successful economies in the world. The Israeli economy is second only to China and India in terms of its rates of economic growth. Colombia has the highest growth rates, I believe, besides Chile and Latin America. And what Colombia shows is that you can have low-level warfare, you can get the resources out of the ground, and you can secure it with private mercenary companies, and you can make money on both ends. And actually, that's a more profitable model than the kinds of economic alternatives that are being developed in Bolivia and Ecuador, which is precisely why there's been this push to pull Bolivia and Ecuador into the so-called war on terror model with these incursions into Ecuadorian territory by the Colombian government. I want to talk a little bit about this shift that the Israeli state went through when they realized that they didn't need peace to have prosperity. They needed security. This was a dramatic change in discussion, in language, and I think it's interesting because of the language being used around the security and prosperity partnership. It isn't about peace. It isn't about justice. It's about security and prosperity. And the Israeli business community in the early 1990s actually started lobbying for some sort of a peace accord with the Palestinians, which is ultimately what led to the deeply, deeply flawed Oslo Accords. But actually that happened because the Israeli business community saw globalization happening. This is the early 90s, post-89, and felt themselves isolated from this economic boom. And there was this slogan of prosperity through peace that took hold, or a business peace was another phrase that was used. Now, what the Israeli business community talks about is prosperity through security. Peace is not necessary. What's needed is the ability to secure the perimeter. But more than that, the Israeli economy has adapted to this reality of constant warfare and found ways to profit from it. And one of the ways that the Israeli state profits from it has been by privatizing much of the response to the occupation, much of the occupation itself, the infrastructure, and then turning Israel into a kind of a showroom for a effective sort of green zone country, a country that can exist with war all around but provide security for its citizens. And this is one of the sort of more controversial parts of the book is looking at how Israel has marketed itself to countries like Canada, the U.S., European countries, running all kinds of extensive tours for our police, borders, politicians to come to Israel and see how you can have prosperity without peace, but with security. And the selling of all of this expertise in border control, checkpoints, CCTV cameras, and so on. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to challenge these days is some of the discourse around the war in Iraq being a failure, the war in Iraq being a disaster. Now, obviously it's a disaster for Iraqis. More than 1 million Iraqis have died. It's a disaster for U.S. taxpayers. It's a disaster for U.S. soldiers. But it is not a disaster for everyone. The occupation of Iraq has really turned that country into a laboratory for privatized warfare and occupation. And what we see is that the longer the occupation wears on, the more privatized it becomes, and the more it becomes this laboratory for all of these private security companies to take on functions that they never have had before or not for many years, like prisoner interrogation, or the complete running of the green zone in the case of Halliburton, which is really sort of like a city-state for Halliburton. And what the stage we're at now is that all these companies that got a taste of a kind of a corporate rule in Iraq, and right now in Iraq there are 180,000 private contractors and only 160,000 foreign soldiers. So there are more private contractors than there are soldiers. And this has a knock-on effect because in all of the other war zones, like Afghanistan, Colombia, the line is, well, we don't have enough soldiers, so we need to fill it in with mercenaries. And Blackwater has been going around saying, let us into Darfur. They want to, they're saying the UN can't do it, we'll do it. So all these companies that got a taste of this in Iraq are now looking to diversify. They're not sure how long this is going to last, but they're looking to diversify. And I think it's really important for us to look at where they see their growth industries, okay? The Blackwater is a particularly interesting company to look at because it's so telling. I mean, they see 3 growth areas, and it's always important to remember that Eric Prince, the CEO of Blackwater, said that he wanted to do for the U.S. military what FedEx did for the post office, okay? He sees himself as fully within the neoliberal paradigm, but taking it to its final frontier, okay? And he sees 3 areas: genocide prevention, okay, in Darfur; response to natural disasters, i.e. responding to the increasing numbers of disasters as a result of global warming; and border control, okay? They have just opened a new base 3 miles from the border with Mexico. There was a huge fight about it because the community that they were supposed to open up in, called Potrero near San Diego, kicked them out. They found another community and they've opened up because they have said that they see the border as a major new industry. Halliburton got a major contract to build prisons in the case of a sudden influx of refugees, okay? Now, this is all connected because, of course, we have an economic model that constantly produces disasters and crises, which constantly produce mass migration, whether it's NAFTA, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a war. So there's now the ability to profit from those disasters and also to profit from containing the people who move in the cases of those disasters, and also to profit from saving the wealthy, saving the elites, from the living with the effects of these disasters. So there's, for instance, some of you have heard me talk about this before, a private company that was launched a year after Hurricane Katrina in Florida called HelpJet. And HelpJet is a a charter airline whose slogan is that we'll turn your hurricane into a luxury vacation. And they work on the country club model, where you pay an annual fee, and if a hurricane is coming to your part of coastal Florida, they will let you know, and they will arrange for you to get out of the hurricane zone, take you to the private airport terminal, whisk you off to the resort of your choice, to the 5-star resort of your choice. Now, we are literally getting into this kind of a phase, and during the wildfires in California last summer, we saw something that we hadn't seen in more than 100 years, which is private firefighters showed up in the wealthiest areas, working for the insurance giant AIG. If you lived in the wealthiest areas that were hit by the forest fires, you paid extra on your insurance premium, and as part of being a VIP member, your home was sprayed down with this white foam, sort of fire retardant, and your home was protected and your neighbor's was not. Now, everyone was shocked by this. In the 8 months since then, 5 of AIG's competitors have announced that they too, and wildfire season is coming, and this year there will be 5 more insurance companies offering VIP private firefighting protection, okay? So this is the way the market is responding to global warming. Do we get it? Okay, not with solar and wind, not with moving to green energy and sustainable living, but actually by reenacting the rapture on Earth, okay? And it is a huge industry, and we have to understand that we are not all in this together, okay? And this is something that was also said this morning, that we were talking about the similarities with the biblical myths of escape. You know, the boat's coming, you and your friends can get on, everyone else can drown. You know, there's a big elevator in the sky coming to take you and your friends. The other area so we see the growth areas. Responding to global warming. By the way, Monsanto has been buying up hundreds of patents on what they call climate-ready seeds, seeds that are resistant to the effects of global warming, salination, drought. And this VIP disaster rescue and containing and surveilling the disposed of people, the displaced people, the migrating people. All of this is the new face of neoliberalism. With the Olympics coming, we have to understand that the Olympics increasingly are the state of emergency, state of exception, that creates the leap forward for the imposition of this privatized security state. And there's a security arms race going on around the Olympics. And just to put this in perspective, after September 11th, the first country to have the Games, very shortly after September 11th, was Greece, the Athens Games. And they spent an unprecedented amount on security because there was such a heightened awareness and fear at that point. They spent $1.5 billion on security, okay? China is spending $13.4 on Olympic security. All of the equipment is staying, okay? By the time it's 2010, the standard will now be Beijing, okay? And this is what we have to prepare for. So, is there another way of responding to our crises beyond containing the poor and saving the rich? As I mentioned, I was recently in Ecuador, and of course part of this model of profiting off of climate change is the Kyoto model. It's carbon trading, carbon credits, marketizing pollution. Indigenous people in Ecuador don't want the pipeline at all, and they want the oil to stay in the ground. And there's a huge leave it in the ground movement in Ecuador because this is going through the Yasuni National Park, and they've come up with a compromise. And the compromise is called ecological debt. And what ecological debt means is that we should pay Ecuador to leave it in the ground. Because why should Ecuador pay the costs for global warming? Why should they not develop the resources that they have when they have been through more than 500 years of exploitative extraction and have not contributed in any major way to the emissions that have led to global warming? And so they've come up with this model and have proposed it on the international stage. So far they haven't gotten much traction. But their deadline, and I think we should be thinking about this, is that in a year and a half there's a meeting in Copenhagen to come up with the post-Kyoto consensus. And I think the real danger is that the post-Kyoto consensus will be more of this market-based solutions to global warming. And what we can do by talking about ecological debt is really shift the discussion. It questions who is a creditor and who is a debtor. It flips it on its head. It says Ecuador doesn't owe us, we owe Ecuador. And it also raises the question of, what does it mean? Who should pay? And how should we pay? And then we might be starting to talk about some of the outrageous profits being made by the oil giants. Every single quarter, it's a new record. I believe Shell's last quarter was $8 billion in clear profits. And then we could think about what this paradigm might look like in Alberta. What's interesting about thinking about ecological debt in Canada, and in BC in particular, is that there is such a powerful legal basis for arguing these points. Now, there was an article recently by the head, I believe, of the British Columbia Chamber of Commerce in the Vancouver Sun, talking about how the biggest problem that the business community in British Columbia faces is the lack of certainty. The lack of certainty. That in order to do business in this province, there needs to be much more certainty around First Nations land claims, and that this should be the major priority of this government, to get certainty, otherwise known as extinguishment. Now, I think it's really worth pausing and thinking about that paradigm, because what would British Columbia look like if there was more certainty than there is right now? Now, how many more mines, clear cuts, subdivisions, ski hills would there be in this province if there was the certainty that the Chamber of Commerce is looking for? And is this lack of business certainty actually the priority for this province, or is it the depletion of the salmon stocks? Is the outrageous inequality and homelessness in this amazingly rich city? So I think we need to really be proud of that uncertainty and be very grateful for the remarkable, heroic achievement that is behind that uncertainty, because it creates a legal basis to make claims and for Canada to be working in coalition with these movements in South America and around the world, because what we see is, this is not a First Nations issue. This is a planetary survival issue. And what we have potentially is another paradigm that is not about pressing eject, that is not about escaping the mess that we create and saving us and our friends, but is based on a completely different model, which understands that the Earth's resources are finite, that we live with the mess that we create, that we cannot escape from it. There's no elevator taking us to the sky, no boats coming, at least not for all of us. And I think that the Olympics 2010, this landmark, represents an incredible opportunity for all of us to build broad-based coalitions. That is an amazing opportunity for all of us, and I hope we use it. Thank you.